Okay, let's get started. So today, you guys are the smart people. You're the ones who showed up for the final exam review, which is great because I have the test in front of me, and I'm going to tell you what's on the test. I'm going to make a little note, so I'm recording this, and I'll put it out on the website for people who aren't here. But you guys will have the opportunity to ask questions and to get a good feeling for what's on the exam. Okay, so the exam is 25% or 25 points of the total. And what's on the exam? Well, actually, before we start, you can take it on Monday the 23rd or Wednesday the 25th. Wednesday the 25th is the day that we're supposed to take it per our schedule. But if you want to come in on Monday, you can do it on Monday as well. It probably will take you about an hour to an hour and a half, probably, is what I'm thinking. So a lot about an hour. So don't come at 2:45 and expect to take it because the time is over with at 3. And we're going to throw you out at 3. So come at 1:45 if that's the case, or 1 o'clock. So it's 25 multiple choice questions. Some of the questions are actually true and false. So they're not all like multiple choice. Some of the multiple choice questions are kind of tricky, actually. So it's not, although it is multiple choice, it's not as easy as you might expect, actually. But it's not hard either. It covers everything without actually doing any programming, which was kind of tough to begin with. So it's 25 multiple choice questions. Each question is worth 1 point. The entire exam is 25%. And I'm going to make a little list here so that I can document what I'm saying, just in case somebody misquotes me or I misquote myself or something. So what do you need to know? You want to know, you need to be familiar with the Android, what do they call it? The parts and pieces. The parts and pieces. I before E except after C. Here we go. Parts and pieces of the development platform. What does that mean? Well, so know what the Android manifest is. Android manifest is know the interface, know the XML UI interface design, know the, actually everything's in XML, so I can repeat it over and over again, or I can just, just stop after this one. Know the XML menu, design techniques. Actually, I'm going to take out the word XML because you can write this in XML or you can also write this without using XML. You can put this in, you can create context menus, you can create options menus. So I'll put in here context options in terms of different types of menus. You can create an XML menu and call the menu using the resource, or you could do it programmatically inside of the code, create an options menu or a context menu or a drop-down menu of some sort. So know that those features are available. I'm not going to ask you how to actually do it. As an example, it's like, what steps would you do, to create an options menu? You don't have to really know how to navigate. So actually, let me go here, number 2. This is item number 2. You don't need to worry about navigation of Eclipse or the tool set because that's kind of a given in terms of, but there's no questions they're going to ask you where is that located. But you want to know the file system. I want to know the file system. What does that mean? We have a RES, resource directory. We've got resource layouts. We've got resource menus. Resource raw files and things go in there. We have the assets. We have the bin. And if if you're not familiar, in fact, let me just bring up Eclipse and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Before I make a long list. So, there are a couple questions. I mean, I'm going to go through the questions individually in a few minutes, but before I do that, I'm just kind of doing a catch-all of what I remember off the top of my head, which is the main focus of the exam, actually. So let's go into the mobile ITU app. That's a good one to go into. Let's see, because there's something in every one of those. So yeah, now we have the source directory, and the source directory has the package information, and inside the package we have all of our items. This package concept is done throughout the entire project, as you can see here. Package is redone again in the generation. And the generation is that r.java file. And what is r.java? Well, it's the resources. So I'm going to finish this one here. No, the resource r.java functionality. Well, what do you know about it? You know, you don't edit that thing. If you edit it, you're going to have major troubles. It's created automatically. It creates everything in there. Strings are in there. What are strings? Values. Where's the string.xml file located? Well, it's in the value subdirectory of resource. And here's actually a trick if you haven't figured this out already. Everything that's in this directory is in this r.java file. So this is just a Java conversion of all of this stuff here. It's pointers to it. So in drawable, we usually keep our icons. So if I asked you, well, where is the icon that goes for the program or the application? Where's that normally stored? It's in the drawables directory. You don't have to remember HDPI and, oops, there we go, LDPM. You don't have to remember all the extensions. Drawable is just fine for that, actually. And you'll see it in the options. It's multiple choice. So, in fact, in the old days, we just had drawable. In fact, you could take all this stuff out and just rename it to drawable, and it would work out just fine. Layouts is going to have our screens, our interfaces, as we remember that. Menus are going to show up in a menu directory. There's the menu directory right here. Strings are in values. This is what I'm referring to in terms of what's in each one of the directories. We actually have the Android manifest, which is not in any of the directories. It's in the root directory. If we go out to the workspace directory, double-click on the project folder, we'll see the manifest right there. So you want to know there's at least 4 questions on the manifest. What's the manifest used for? I mean, as a basic purpose. In fact, if you open up the manifest, in fact, one way of reviewing for the final exam is just to go through, and if you've created the projects, you'll ace the final because you'll know how to work with the interface and you'll know what we're talking about. If you've cheated on the projects or if you haven't done any of the projects, you're probably going to fail the final because you're not going to know anything. You can't really guess at these questions. They're not necessarily like guessable. But what's in the manifest? Well, you can actually just kind of use this as an example. There's application configurations. What's that going to be? Well, that's going to be like the icon that's used, the name of the application. So we can see the label, the icon, and the string. The purpose of the strings are to hold values that are going to be used throughout the entire everything. Strings can be used everywhere. Strings can even be used in the source code without referring to any resource element. You could just take the string and add it to another string if you wanted to. So strings are universally used throughout the entire API. So remember that concept. Because there's a couple questions on strings as well, values. Permissions are a huge part of the manifest, actually, and there's a couple questions. Let me get back to my cheat sheet here. Let's see, know the resource r.java functionality. When I'm done with this, I'll be putting this on bhacker.com, but you can take your own notes. But if you don't want to take notes, you can use these notes. This is just kind of a memory aid for me, and the fact that I didn't do it for those people who aren't here, they can have a record of this. So you want to know the resources r.java functionality, how and where resources are stored and used. Stored, used, and generated. How's that? Used and generated. They're not generated automatically. By the way, you can't actually generate it. That's a trick question. You can't generate, you can't edit that file. So, I was referring to a few minutes ago the manifest. So know how to set permissions and settings associated with the Android manifest. So we all know, hopefully by now, by default, that nothing is set. A Android application that you create, Hello World, has absolutely no permissions for anything. It has got the lowest level of security associated with it. And in order to raise that, you have to actually add permissions. If you're going to add permissions, it's going to be specific towards what your application is going to do. You even actually need to add permissions for intents. So let me add that here. Know the concept of intents services. Networking, mapping, content providers. So let's go back to the manifest for a second, because that's where I left off. So back in the manifest, we have permissions. We know that we can edit the file using XML, obviously. We can set the version number. We can set the minimum and the maximum SDK that this particular application is going to run for. We can set the package information. All of this stuff is configuration associated with the project file. The project file stores in a file called properties, which is right here, project properties. Do we edit this file? No. This file is generated automatically in Eclipse. You can edit it and it will change it. It's not as bad as editing the r.resource, resource, but it's better to use the automated project properties. The information in here ends up in the properties file. Well, some of it does. Some of it is just set by default. If it's not in the project properties file, default settings are used. Oops, let me close this for a second. Default settings are used in there. And the only thing I have set here is target Android is to 10. So, but it will tell you in here, but you're not going to have this available to you. It's a closed book, closed note exam. So you're not going to know that. You open up the file, you can kind of see it's kind of user friendly in that aspect. But so properties, project properties are set by the Android system. They're not editable either. We don't really touch any of these other files. I haven't touched them in the course, so don't worry about it. If we didn't talk about it in the course, you don't actually have to worry about it in terms of the exam. In fact, we didn't talk about adding on third-party libraries either. You could do that. It would show up in the libraries directory. It would also be part of the project configuration. In terms of the auto generation, the build configuration is also part. We didn't really talk about that in the course either, but you don't want to edit that file either. It's automatically generated. Not only that, but it just sets debug mode, release mode, resources, stuff like that. But you don't want to edit that either. But the manifest, you do edit that Android manifest. That's your way of configuring the project. Let's see what else I need to know. Assets, as I mentioned earlier in the course, we can load files. That's a good one here. So let me add that to my cheat sheet list here. Know the concept of using files and databases with Android projects. And let me just add something here. I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes because I just thought about this as well. Know the platform, kernel, OS environments, i.e. processes, processes, modules, kernel, config, specifics, not specifics, background. I'm going to talk about both of these two items in a few minutes here because you're probably looking at this going, well, what does she mean by that? go back to item number 7. So knowing the concept of files and databases within Android projects, if you remember before, we can load a file in from the outside. We can load a file in from the inside. An internally loaded file. In fact, there's an entire lecture on all of these concepts. That everything on the exam is coming out of the PowerPoint lectures and out of the examples and things that I went through throughout the course. So in terms of internal files, those are in the assets directory. So HTML files, text files, we can read and write to files, no problem. Internally or externally, we can load a file from a URL. We can load an MP3 file. We can load anything you want from outside via the internet or via a directory that is on the device. So we can, our application can read and write to files. If they're reading and writing to files, where are those files stored? SD card. You never, ever, ever store anything on the device. The device is not capable of that. The only storage mechanism we have is through the SD card. SD card is like flash memory, sort of like, what do you call it? Like a USB drive almost. And you can write to the root of that SD card or anything on the SD card. So most applications would create a subfolder, call it whatever their application is, and put all their files in that subfolder. So external files are loaded from the SD card, or they're loaded from the internet, or they're loaded from an external location, which is really the only two options you have is the internet, or you have the SD card. Internal files are loaded from within the APK file, and they're stored in the asset directory. And the other option you have in terms of data, what we went over in the class, is the SQL database. There's no need to create a database itself, but you do have to create your own tables. Databases are not shared among all applications. Each application has its own database abstraction and its own tables that aren't shared. So remember that concept. What's shared among all different applications? Content providers. Anything in the content provider. What's a content provider? It's another thing you wanted to be familiar with. Did I put that on here? I think I did. A content provider. I'm going back to number 6. Content providers provide contact lists, email addresses, telephone numbers, SMS messages. You can create your own content provider. That's how you're going to, if you want to share information among different applications, you use content providers. Content providers are available to everybody. Databases, don't get tripped on that, are not available to everybody. Each application has its own database. Each application reads and writes to the database. There's nothing to install. The database is there for you automatically. Are there any privileges to set for that? Nope. Do not set privileges. You're automatically accessible to data. Do you have to set privileges for files? To read and write to the SD card, yes. You have to open up file I/O. To read and write from within the application? Nope. So going back to, and I'm going to kind of blend in this last one here that I have highlighted, the kernel background. In order to understand the way that the permissions are set and the way that the tools are used among the different applications, you almost have to understand the platform. And understand the platform, you know it's built on a 2.6 Linux kernel. Darwin. It's a Darwin Linux kernel, actually. So the platform is Linux. Remember that. Each process, each application that runs is running in its own separate process and has its own separate process abstraction. There is absolutely no inter-process communication that's managed by the kernel. Instead, the applications manage their own inter-process communication. And how do they do that? They use intents. So this is where the intent concept comes from. This is a nice review because some of you guys are looking at me like, I have no idea what you're talking about. An intent. Here's our word here. An intent is different than a service. An intent is a form of inter-process communication. From within the process, you open up Hello World, and Hello World has a screen that says, give me your name and your telephone number. And the user puts that in there. If Hello World wants to switch processes from this process to another process, it finishes the current process. Makes an intent object. The intent object is what facilitates the new screen to show up. New screen shows up. out of nowhere, it's screen B, and you can pass information back and forth using the intent object. So the intent object manages the inter-process communication between the process abstraction that occurs. And it's a forking of a child process. So parent forks a child, forks a child, forks a child. You can terminate by saying finish. You can, which is what you're going to normally do. If you don't terminate processes, you end up with your whole program crashing because there is no inter-process. It's only one process per application that's running. So each application you're running only has one process running simultaneously. There's no multiple. It's not multi-threaded, not multi-processing. But intents create the multiple one to another, and then you finish the old one, you start the new one calls the next one, the new one calls. It's like a dominoes effect. Each domino hits the next domino, and that's how you get them all working, and then eventually they're all collapsed, and then you go back to the beginning or you do something different, which is different from a service. What's a service? It's a background process. So your program you're running, if you have a foreground, you have one process that's running as your application. And then the service is a totally different program that's running. And it's running in the background. And it doesn't stop. It just continues to run. Lifecycle. So be familiar with the application lifecycle. We had one, actually. In fact, I showed it to you a couple of times in the beginning of the class. It's in the first couple of lectures, actually repeated at least twice, where we start out and we have the on create, and we have the on destroy, and we have all of the different phases. Well, you want to be familiar with that concept because that's the basis for how services run, in essence, because what you have with a service is you have a life cycle that starts, that doesn't end. It's dormant, it's in the background. What does a service do? It waits, it wakes up, and it does something, and then it goes back to sleep, and then it waits. It's a background process, essentially. It's a daemon. You want to call it a daemon, kind of like a print service, if you think of it that way. You can create service applications that don't have a UI. So services don't normally have a UI, but they're running. You can stop services just like you stop applications by going in and stopping them. In fact, we had an example in the beginning of the course that did that. It stopped services, if you remember that one. Networking. We looked at UDP, TCP, IP. Same, it's Unix, 2.6 kernel. So anything you can do on Unix in terms of IP, Internet Protocol, UDP and TCP, done the same way. In fact, it's identical to any Unix concept of that nature. Implemented in Java using the base Java courses. If you're in the EE class, that's what I'm talking about. It's the Java EE, UDP, TCP, IP. Same program that you write that works on a Java JVM can work in this environment doing the same identical thing. What is it used for? Transferring information back and forth, stuff like that. I'm going to skip mapping for a second. The content providers I mentioned a few minutes ago, that's the information related to the contact list, the telephone, notes, I don't know, anything. You can create your own. You can create your own content if you wanted to and share it among different programs. But that's how information is shared amongst the different programs themselves. Mapping, we did a whole lecture on Google Maps. Mapping features know that you have to get a map key. What does the map key do? It uniquely identifies the location of your device. So you have to get permissions through a certificate that you're getting that basically tells Google in the application. And it's basically for location purposes. Know the basics of location providers, location functionality. There's an entire lecture on mapping. And there's at least 2 or 3 questions on that as well on the exam. Let's see, we've got files, databases. So outside of the concept of that the operating system is a kernel based, it's actually loaded just like a regular old Unix operating system. We have kernel loadable modules. What are the modules? There's a support for everything. Services can be loaded on as modules actually when the program starts. One of the modules as an example to look at and that we covered in this class is the concept of notifications. It's a kernel module that's loaded on that provides the notifications service. We also have ones that work with GPS that gives us tracking information as a loadable module. We usually, here's the trick to the loadable modules. If it shows up in the settings, it's a loadable module. It means you can turn it on, turn it off. You know, like the 3G service, the mapping services, or the GPS services. The internet is a loadable module, the IP protocols. You can turn those notifications off. You can turn off, if you can turn it on and off and it's in the settings window, it's a module, kernel loadable module. You can't really do anything. The way that you configure the kernel is through the settings of the phone. You can actually get to the settings on the phone via your applications as well. You can call those kernel services, and if you know that they're a module, you make an instance of the module that says notification. And you read and write to the notifications, and you use that service, or you shut notifications off, or you turn notifications on, something of that nature. Let's see, be familiar with the life cycle. That's good. We're actually running out. We're getting close to the... Let's see, what else can I remember? Let's see, so nothing about programming. I should just add that to the bottom here. No programming questions. There are a couple of questions, though, about methods. So no programming questions that require Java syntax or semantics, but there are some method questions. What are the methods questions? Well, let me go to one of them as an example. Question number 3 on the exam says, I'll read you the question actually. I'm not going to read you the answers to the questions and let you look this one up on your own actually. But this gives you an example of the level of difficulty or what you probably should start looking up. And if you go to the Android developers website, you can find all the information. In fact, that's not bad reading. If you haven't done the programming assignments and you have no clue what you're talking about, go to developer.android.com or android.developer.com, I think it is. You can shut down an activity by calling its blah 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 method. That's what I mean by method questions. And you know that one has 4 options. 1, 2, 3, 4 options. And just to refresh my memory here, this is, I think it's Android developer, or is it developer.android? Developer.android.com, perhaps, maybe. Yep, there it is. Go into resources, references, development guide. Development guide's actually not too bad. Talks about dialogues. There we go. That's another one you want to know about as well. But this is here, let me zoom this out a little bit so you can see this thing here. This is the website I'm referring to. It is developer.android.com. It replaces the need for a textbook for this course. None of the questions come out of any textbook. Nor did it come out of here, but this at least gives you a pretty good index on the side here. If you're not familiar with content providers, you can click on content providers, read all about those. You know, kind of catch up if you haven't been paying attention or haven't been doing anything. There are questions about dialog boxes. So there are questions about dialog boxes and dialog and alert. Let's just call that alert boxes and similar features. Calling up a window, essentially. All right, so let me see what I missed here. Question number 1. The Android manifest. I can read you the question actually. The Android manifest, blah, blah, blah. Select an option. Number 2, the Android manifest, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, you have to know about the Android manifest. Number 3, I already read you. Shutting down an activity is called by the something method. What's this method? Question number 4, a service runs in the main thread, blah, blah, blah. It's a service-related question. And how it's running. And that's a true or false question, actually. This is really simple now. I'm reading you all the questions. Number 5. It's a life cycle question about what method is called when the service is first created. So familiarize yourself with the common methods for applications and for services. You can get that from Android developer. You know, it's an example. You know, we have the onCreate method. You know, when is that called? If you look at the life cycle diagram that's in one of the lectures, it actually lists out all the methods for you. So you can actually, and those are the methods that are on the exam, by the way. So if the method doesn't look familiar to you, it's probably made up. Because that's the other thing, and that's kind of why it made it kind of tricky. Some of the questions took things that don't sound right and made them sound right, but they're really not right. I mean, they're really, because there's some weird names for stuff, but it makes it look like, you know, if you didn't know what you're talking about, the answer actually looks pretty good, but it's wrong. It's really the one that's weird that actually makes it, you know. So, all right, that was number 5. Number 6 has a it's a permissions question about the manifest having to do with a feature. Know what the permissions are. You don't have to memorize each one of the permissions, but know what you would set a permission for, essentially. Number 7. Application components. Let me add that to the list, actually. Know what application components are. And you're like, well, what's an application component? Oh no, you guys are lost. There's no help for you. How about an activity? For example. Okay, let's just put here for example. And activity is an application component. What do you get when you make Hello World? Hello World activity. Look that up. Look up application components. There's 4 different types of them. Actually, here, I'll put it on here. I'll even make this as simple as I can. Know the 4 different types. Look those up. All right, what else we got? I'm only on question 7 out of 25. Calendar provider. It's a true-false question. It has to do with content providers and the calendar. It's just using the calendar as an example. You don't have to know the features of all of these things, however. You don't have to know what's in the calendar or what's in the SMS or whatever, address book or something like that. Question number 9 is on the Android UI. And it has to do with views and view groups. Know about the UI components. For example, views and view groups. And widgets. What are widgets? Buttons, text boxes, input boxes. What are views and view groups? Well, they hold those things. What is everything? What is the main component you have to put on the UI in order to get all of your widgets to show up? Some sort of a view. You have to have a view. If you don't have a view, nothing's going to be seen. What's the highest level in the hierarchy that you need? No, the hierarchy. How do you spell hierarchy? H. Hierarchy. Okay, whatever. I'm done spelling that one. Hierarchy. I don't know. Of UI components. What's the outermost element of the UI component? Anyone know that one? Layout. Layouts. Views. View groups. You have to have a layout. There is a lecture that covers all of them. What do we have? Relative layouts, linear layouts. You don't have to know each one of the different layout types with the layout concepts. So the layout's the big hierarchy. The highest level, it's almost like the root, is the layout. Inside of the layout we have our views. What do we have? Image views, map views, web views, all sorts of different types of views that can go into what's called view groups that keep views together in terms of their components, like sort of like a container. Inside of the views we have buttons and text box. Those are widgets that end up inside of the views. There's a whole entire lecture though on that will help you. And actually, before I forget, because I've already forgotten so far, so I'll just, now that I'm thinking about it and I say there's an entire lecture on that, let me go show you something in here for those of you who haven't visited this yet. In the lectures for the course, I made sure a couple weeks ago actually I filled them in. So we have 2 sets of lectures in here. Lectures, there we go. Those are the videos. We have a tutorial set. This is the new part I put in. These were the odd ones that weren't here originally. They're all in here. So there's 15 short. These are not long ones. They're like maybe 5 or 6 slides each. 10 slides at the most. Very graphical. Very nice. They don't give you very much background, but they show you all the features. These are highly recommended to if you're not familiar with what the layouts are, what the view groups are. The tutorials will help you with that. The lectures 1 through 10 here are a little bit more, am I in the Android course? Yes, I am. That's good. I just want to make sure because it's very similar for the iPhone. These are the ones that are going to give you a lot of reading, background information. There's one in here that you did TCP, UDP ones in here. The services are in here. Not a bad place. So this is your study material in lieu of a textbook. There's no textbook for this course, obviously, as we've seen. So let's see. Zoom back in here. All right, where was I? So yeah, okay. So number 9 was on UIs. So the concept of the layouts, the views, the view groups, the UI hierarchy is what we're interested in looking at. Number 10. Oh, look at this. There's no shortage of information. Number 10 is on event-driven behavior. So be familiar with the event-driven behavior aspects, concepts. What do I mean by that? Event-driven behavior is listeners. For example, listeners. On-click listeners, on-touch listeners, on-change listeners. You're not going to be asked to know what they're called, but the concept of the listener is important. The question is more of a configuration using I'll put the word in here that's used in the question actually. Know how callbacks. Callbacks is the word I'm giving you as a hint. Callbacks are performed. Callbacks. So I'll put this in quotes here. I don't know what a callback is actually. I'll give you that to look up. It has to do with UI, user events, in terms of the listeners. You may be familiar with that. That's question number 10. We're almost halfway there. Number 11, intent object. So this goes back to, it's an intent question. Know the kinds of data that's a part of an intent. What an intent is. In fact, the developer.android.com will give you a lot of information about intents. That would be excellent reading for you on that. So that was number 11. Number 12 is also on an intent. There's a lot of intent questions. For some reason I went haywire with that. So, this one has to do with intent handling. So, and also the concept of intent filters. Let me put that back up here with the intent one here. Intent filters. So look that word up as well. So you are familiar with what an intent filter actually is. And know that they go in the manifest. And what actually goes in the manifest in the form of an intent? It's the application name. You know, whatever class we might be actually calling. Why do we need that? Well, because our main thread needs permission to load multiple threads. So we list them in the manifest. It makes them available for use with the intents whether we use them or not. So loading intents, using intents, configuring for intents, important concepts. Let's see, that was number 11 and number 12. Number 13. That's on data storage. It's at the internal, the external, and the database files. That's the question that was on that. Number 14. Android security architecture. It's actually written in the question. It's a true-false question as well. So some of them are, there's like maybe a 1, 2, 3, 4, there's about 7 or 8 true-false questions. But don't be fooled. Actually think about it, because some of the true-false questions actually look like they're false or they look like they're true. Because you'd think logically, but if you don't know what Android is doing with it, you know. As an example, you know, there is no inter-process. It's not one of the questions, but there is no inter-process communication, although it's on a Linux system, you know. But you'd be fooled to say, oh yeah, one process can talk to another. Sure, why not? Just like, you know, it's Linux, right? But yeah, it's a special breed of Linux. Let's see. Sensors. The Android platform supports 3 broad categories of sensors. That's part of the question, actually. No, the categories of sensors. I covered this as basic information in the beginning. You don't actually need to know how to program with the sensors. But sensors are being, you know what happens when you, you know, some temperatures in the, you know, would be, you know, as an example, a sensor for, is it the phone in landscape or portrait mode? That's a sensor. Temperature sensors, movement sensors, motion, shaking, dropping, other sensors that might be part of it. Go ahead and look up sensors. You know the categories of sensors and the features that are available for the API interface. So, you know, you can tell when the phone gets turned on a landscape mode or something as a sensor. So, that would be part of an orientation sensor, actually. Accelerometers, temperature, all sorts of different things. Let's see. You don't have to know how to program with them, but the features, you know, like what are the sensors? That's what I'm trying to get at. I didn't actually show you any examples for. Maybe actually I probably showed you landscape and portrait mode sensors, but probably not. I don't know. No, we had some PowerPoints on it. Let's see. So what do we have? The mapping features. Number 16 is on the Google Maps, mapping features in the API, and it has to talk about map view actually. Map view, you know, is a subclass of view group. I hope at this point. So view group is a map view. It's a view, map view. Because the word, the name of the GUI component sort of gives it away, I think. So, number 17 is another permissions question. It's a true-false permission question. Number 16 on the map view is not a true-false. It's a multiple select. You know, I think. So we have another permission. So that's a 2 or 3 permissions so far, 2 or 3 intents so far. Seems to be weighted a little heavy on that. and manifest. I weighted heavy on the manifest because that's the stuff we really hit a lot of in the course. Number 18 is a UI menus question. So it's another menus that are associated with the UI. Not programming related. It's more concept based, essentially. Number 19 talks about the directory structure. So that's the beginning of when I started going through the review. I showed you the directory, the resource directory, and the assets folder, and the source folder. That question is getting, and it's not a true-false. It's a selected directory for a particular component. Where does it belong? Kind of question. Question number 20. Be familiar with the DDMS. The DAR work debugging management. So, as a debugging tool, you don't have to know all of the features of it, but what have we seen in this particular course? When we talked about text messaging as an example, we loaded up the DDMS, and it gave us the ability to actually send a message to a device, to an emulator that was out there. So what does the DDMS do? It provides the debugging tools and interface to the emulators. So the emulators are out there running. We want to send a text message to it. We want to simulate that. We want to send. We also used it to send longitude and latitude to the emulators to show where we were to fake a position or position change. We can use it for text message. We can actually simulate a telephone call if we wanted to using the DDMS. What else can it do? It provides the facility for our logs. So we can write the log as an object, and it shows up in the log. You can set a filter on the log. Actually, I did this earlier on in the course. And you can filter out messages. So it's used as a debugging and a troubleshooting kind of tool, and it interfaces with the emulators. The question is very general. It's about a feature of the DDMS that I just talked about a few minutes ago. So be familiar with the items that we covered in the class in terms of, it's actually a true-false question, so it's actually pretty easy, actually, so it's not too bad. Number 21 has to do with the programming environment that, how do I say it without giving the question away? Here's your freebie for those of you who showed up today and who are listening to the video. It's a trick question, actually, because what do we write? What do we write Android programs in? Java. Oh, you should get this question right? What a lot of people don't know is that there's also a C or C++ interface to it. And you can actually integrate non-Java code into the interface as well. It will actually support, in fact, think about the concept. The kernel is Linux-based, written in C. What is the platform written in? C, C++. You can write modules in C or C++ and use them on the platform. That's how you build the kernel, actually. So you can build kernel interface modules in C. It's not restricted to 100% Java. What do you build in Java? The applications, from the user mode. Why? Because the applications run on a JVM. Well, each application runs in its own JVM that's created as an abstraction. You can actually write, believe it or not, native C code applications as well. They're not running on the JVM, they're speaking directly with the kernel, but they're running in the user mode. Just like Unix, where it supports multiple different languages, scripting languages, programming language support. If there's support for it on the phone, you can use it in the apps. Classic example, you can actually write JavaScript, native JavaScript in your programs. You can actually, we didn't do that in this class, but you can actually incorporate that with the web view and do CSS for style sheets and do HTML stuff and write HTML. In fact, there's filters. You can create strings as HTML object components, use them. You can write C++ code. You can use JavaScript. You can use multiple differently. It's not stuck to 100% Java. Platform isn't written in Java either. Platform is written in C. So it's a kernel, Linux kernel. So you can write your own module. So you'll get the question. Just know that it's not 100% Java, and you'll have the answer correct. It's an interesting kind of question, and most people will look at that and go, "Thought everything was written in Java." But this particular component's not written in Java, and it works. So you guys, that's your freebie for showing up today. Number 22 is a kernel question. Android relies on blah, 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 services, blah, 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 blah. Think about kernel services. Think about what does a kernel do? Provides services. It's just like Linux, actually. You say, I'm not familiar with Linux. All right, just like, think of the JVM if you're familiar with Java. What does the JVM provide for applications? It provides the interface to the security, to the file I/O, to the permissions. So, what does a manifest file do? Well, it's setting those configuration files. If you haven't noticed, you don't write programs for Android and actually have to set text files and put them in directories to set permissions. Instead, it's all handled through the manifest, which is your permissions file, by the way. So, which is kind of interesting concept as well. Number 23. It's a layout question. It's a true-false one, and it actually deals with the concept of the linear layout. Know the differences between the different layouts. What makes the linear layout linear? What makes the relative layout relative? There's not that many layouts. There's only a handful, so it's not too bad. We all know, actually, going back to that other trick question that I gave you the answer for, you know you don't actually have to use Eclipse either, right? Eclipse is just in fact, you can use, you can compile with Java without using Eclipse, okay? And you would still have the same kind of components. In fact, you don't even have to have a project, believe it or not. You can just have Java files. What a manifest file. You're actually programming in Java, essentially, when you write those applications. But Eclipse just makes it easier. All right, so number 24. So number 23 is a layout question. Number 24, it talks about the action bar. What's the action bar? Well, it's a feature. So, no. It's a window. Well, be familiar with miscellaneous app interface features such as action bar. What is that other one? Long touches. This is what I'm referring to. To bring up the context menu, to bring up options menus. Let's see, long touches to zoom out a little bit here. To bring up menus. Button presses. To go back. Bring up options menus, etc. Basic features of navigation. Let's just put here. Basic navigation features. Let's see. That's what question number 24 is really getting at. It's a true-false question as well. Number 25 is on dialogues, which I covered up in a previous bullet point somewhere here. Here it is here. So we know we have different dialogues. What's a dialogue? It's a little box that shows up on the screen, and we can program buttons for the dialogues. In fact, it was an entire lecture. It's one of the tutorial lectures. It covers dialogues. In fact, if you're familiar, those tutorial lectures, there's one in there on views, view groups, hierarchies as well. It's not going to cover the kernel stuff. That was in my lectures. The ones that, not the tutorials, the other set that's above it, along with the basic concepts. So I only have 18 items, but there's 25 questions on the exam, and that was just basically an overview of what each one of the questions is on. So you will already know about the exam, hopefully. You already know what you're supposed to study for. People will still fail it, however. But, well, it's only because a lot of people haven't done the assignments. I know that because there's not too many assignments posted in the EMS. Unless there's a huge problem with the EMS and it's not taking work or something. I don't know about that. But you do know everything is due on May 1st, I hope. So, well, you guys here sitting here are probably the ones who put the most stuff in there. It's everybody else who's gone, who doesn't have anything posted yet. So those are the ones who are going to fail the final, probably. I started a little list here. I think that's good. I think the list is, let's see, you need a familiar your parts. Let me just take a quick look at the Eclipse interface one more time to make sure there's nothing I forgot. I didn't actually ask you anything about the source code directory or anything about packages, believe it or not. There's no package questions. There are no questions about any of the API levels either. In fact, I could have asked you probably a question about the Google tools and sample files, but I didn't. No questions about libraries, no questions about bins, no questions about the DEX or the APK files either. We know that the DEX is a special class file, and the APA is actually a class that's encapsulated with the package that makes it into an applet. Makes it into a runnable program for it adds the JVM support essentially for the applet environment. Is there anything that anyone can think of, or does anyone have any questions about anything I may have missed or didn't mention in my review? No? I don't think I've left anything out. I think I got it all. So we're done. So there's this is the very last class actually of the course. Well, if you have any questions, you can always send me an email message. You can always answer the questions by email. The exam probably take about, depends on how well you know the material. You know, you could probably get done in about a half hour, 45 minutes, if you know it all, and you're confident with your answers. If not, it's probably going to take about an hour-ish, depending upon how much you have to guess. So. Alright, so I'll post this out on bhacker.com, and I will post this out as well as the video, so you can look at it. Do we have the TA here? Oh, good. We got the attendance going on? Okay, good. So you guys know who came in late. You could take it on the 23rd or the 25th, from 10 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But don't come in at 3 o'clock or 2:45. Come in at 1. I think probably about 1 o'clock is probably the latest you want to come in for that, 1 or 2. You could probably get it done in an hour, but you're rushing yourself because we're leaving at 3. So, and if you don't have any questions, comments, or concerns, we're done for today. And that's what we were supposed to accomplish. And I don't know, I can't really tell you anything else. That's the exam right there. So, thanks for showing up, and I'll see you next week.